Welcome back to Reformed Thinking. I am your host, and it is really good to have you with us for another deep dive into the archives of church history.
Glad to be here. We have a really fascinating text to look at today.
We do. We are not just going to skim the surface of this one. Our goal today is to really get into the weeds, to pull apart the arguments, and see how the theology works under the hood. So we are heading back to the mid-18th century.
Right, August 1750, to be specific.
And the man of the hour is Jonathan Edwards. Now, I think for a lot of people, the name Edwards brings up a very specific image.
Oh, absolutely. They immediately think of fire and brimstone, sinners in the hands of an angry God,
Yeah, that is the classic association.
which is a valid part of his ministry, for sure, but it is a very narrow slice of who the man actually was. Edwards was a pastor who cared intensely about the comfort of his people, not just their conviction.
And that is spot on with what we are going to see today. We're looking at a sermon he preached titled, "The Peace Which Christ Gives His True Followers." And right off the bat, I have to say, this isn't just a fluffy, don't worry, be happy kind of message.
No, not at all. Edwards treats peace almost like a mechanic treats an engine. He wants to know how it functions.
He wants to know the source.
Yes, he wants to know why it lasts, and he really wants to know why the peace the world offers falls apart so easily.
So let's set the scene for you guys listening. It is August 1750 in Northampton, Massachusetts. But the text Edwards chooses takes us back to a much darker, much heavier night. We are in the Gospel of John, chapter 14, specifically verse 27.
The upper room. This is the night before the crucifixion.
I think we often gloss over the atmosphere of that room. You look at the famous paintings, and it all looks very serene, very calm. But historically and biblically, what is the actual mood in that space?
It is thick with tension. I mean, you have to remember, Judas Iscariot has just walked out the door. Jesus has identified him as the betrayer. So the group is shrunk, the traitor is out in the night, and the remaining disciples are staring down the barrel of a complete catastrophe.
Because Jesus has just dropped the bomb that he is leaving them.
Yeah. He's been dropping hints for a while, but now he is being explicit. He says, I am going away. And for these men, that is the worst possible news they could hear.
They gave up everything.
They really did. They left their nets, their tax booths, their entire families. They have staked their entire lives on this man being the Messiah who stays and sets up a kingdom. And now he says he is dying.
So they are terrified. They feel entirely abandoned.
They feel like orphans. In fact, Jesus uses that exact word a little later, I will not leave you orphans. But in this specific moment, the sorrow is just crushing them. And right into that panic, Jesus speaks these words.
Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world gives, give I unto you.
It is an incredibly famous verse.
It is. But Edwards does something with it that I honestly did not expect. He takes that phrase, peace I leave with you, and he looks at it through a strictly legal lens. He calls it a last will.
That is the core analogy of the entire sermon. And it is not just a poetic flourish on his part. Edwards is being very precise with his Reformed theology here.
So let's unpack this idea of the last will. Why does he take the sermon in that direction?
Well, look at the language Jesus uses there. I leave with you. That is the language of a dying man bequeathing his property. It is what you do on your deathbed. You look at your family and you say, I am leaving you the house. I am leaving you the savings.
Edwards connects this directly to the book of Hebrews, doesn't he?
He does. He goes to Hebrews chapter 9, verses 15 through 17. The author of Hebrews makes a very technical legal argument there. He says that a testament, a will, is of no strength at all while the testator lives.
The testator being the person who actually wrote the will.
Correct. If I write a will today, leaving you my library, you do not get the books today. You do not get them next week. As long as I am breathing, that will is just a piece of paper. It has no legal force to transfer those assets.
It requires a death to trigger it.
Death is the activating mechanism. And Edwards applies this to what we call the covenant of grace. He says that Christ is the testator. All the blessings of the Christian life, the forgiveness, the adoption, and specifically this peace, are the assets sitting in the estate. But for the heirs to receive them, the testator had to die.
So the cross wasn't just a sacrifice for sin. In this framework, it was the legal execution of the will.
Precisely. Edwards argues that Christ died to purchase the legacy and to ratify the will. Without the death of Christ, the peace would remain theoretical. He would stay up in heaven with God. But the death of the Son releases it to us down here.
That is a fascinating way to view the atonement. But here's where I need you to break down the distinction Edwards makes, because he compares Jesus to an earthly parent, but then he completely flips that comparison on its head.
This is the sheer brilliance of the sermon. Think about a normal earthly inheritance. If a wealthy father dies, he leaves a large estate to his children. The children now take possession of the estate. But where is the father?
He is gone. He is in the grave.
Right. He does not get to enjoy the estate with his children. The father's possession has to end so that the children's possession can begin. There's absolutely no overlap. It is a transfer caused by absence.
You get the house because he isn't around to live in it anymore.
Exactly. But Christ is an entirely different kind of testator. Yes, he died to activate the will. That was a strict legal necessity. But, and this is the turning point, he rose again.
He didn't stay dead.
He conquers the grave. So Christ is the only testator in history who dies to leave a will and then comes back to life to be the executor of that very same will.
And not just the executor, Edwards points out that he enjoys the legacy alongside the heirs.
That is the crucial takeaway. Because he is alive, he continues to possess the peace. He bequeathed. He didn't give it away and lose it. He shares it. So when a Christian experiences this peace, they are not just holding on to a sentimental gift from a departed hero. They are sitting at the table with the living Lord, sharing the exact same meal.
That changes the dynamic completely. It moves it from a cold legal transaction to a living relationship. We are co-heirs in the most literal sense of the word.
We are participating in his life. We are not just looking back and remembering him.
Okay, so we have established the legal framework. It is a bequest from a dying testator who lives again. Now let's move to the second part of our discussion. What is actually in this will? What is the nature of this legacy?
Well, Edwards starts by clearing the deck. He tells his congregation what is not in the will. And this is vital because we all tend to project our own earthly desires onto God.
Right, it is not silver and gold.
No. Edwards points us back to the humiliation of Christ. He quotes that famous line Jesus said about himself. The foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man had not where to lay his head.
Jesus was poor.
Economically speaking, he was destitute. He did not have a diverse portfolio. He didn't have a massive estate in Jerusalem to leave to Peter and John. So if you're coming to Christ expecting material wealth, you are looking for something he never promised to leave you.
He left them what he actually had, and what he had in massive abundance was peace.
Edwards identifies two main characteristics of this peace. First, he calls it true peace, and second, he calls it Christ's peace.
Let's look at that first one, true peace. I think in our modern context, we tend to define peace as a pure feeling. If I feel calm, I have peace. If my heart is racing, I don't. But Edwards seems to be pointing to something far more objective.
He is. Because if peace were just a feeling, it would be incredibly fragile. It would depend entirely on your blood sugar, or the weather outside, or how much sleep you got last night. Edwards grounds true peace in objective reality. And the first pillar of this is peace with God.
This is the theological concept of reconciliation.
It is forensic. It is a legal standing. He leans heavily on Romans chapter 8, verse 34, who is he that condemneth? The legacy Christ leaves is a status. You stand before the judge of the universe, and the verdict handed down is not guilty. The active war between the sinner and a holy God is over.
So even if I feel massive turmoil in my emotions, that objective peace remains intact. The treaty is still valid.
That's right. The treaty has been signed in blood. That is the bedrock foundation. From there, Edwards moves to a second aspect, safety.
He talks a lot about protection from enemies.
Enemies, the ultimate enemies. He mentions wicked men and the powers of darkness, sure. But the biggest enemy he highlights is death. He says that for the holder of this legacy, death has lost its sting.
That phrase, lost its sting, it doesn't mean we get a pass on physical death.
No, Christians still face the grave. But the threat of death, the penal aspect of it, the absolute terror of facing the wrath of God, that is gone. You are safe. Even if the entire society is falling apart around you, you are in a safe habitation because your soul is secure in the hands of the testator.
Then he moves to the internal experience of it. He calls it internal tranquility. And this is where I had to slow down a bit with his language. He says that grace sets reason on the throne.
That sounds very philosophical to our modern ears, doesn't it? Almost like something pulled from the Enlightenment.
It really does. It sounds like he is saying the secret to peace is just being more logical.
That is not what Edwards is getting at. We have to understand his view of human nature. Edwards believes that sin creates massive internal disorder. In a natural sinful state, the human soul is essentially in anarchy. The passions, the physical appetites, the wild emotions, they run the show.
So if I'm hungry, I eat. If I am angry, I lash out. The base impulse rules the man.
Right. The lower faculties are dictating terms to the higher faculties. Reason is reduced to a slave to the gut. What grace does, according to Edwards, is restore the original created order. It puts reason, and by that he means a mind that has been enlightened by Scripture and the Holy Spirit, back in the driver's seat.
So it is not just raw human intellect, it is renewed thinking.
It is the mind of Christ operating in the believer. So now, when the passion of envy flares up, this sanctified reason steps in and says, no, God is sovereign, I have my assigned portion, I will not be envious. And the soul settles down.
So internal peace is actually the direct result of internal order.
Yes, peace is not just the absence of external trouble. It is the presence of rightful government inside the soul. Edwards uses a very strong word here, mortify. He says grace mortifies things like envy, wrath, and malice.
That means to kill, to put it to death.
It is a violent word for a very peaceful result.
Yeah.
You cannot have internal tranquility if you are keeping your envy alive like a pet in the backyard. You have to kill it. And this legacy from Christ gives you the actual strength to do that.
He also brings in the image of an anchor.
I love that specific image. Without this peace, he says, the soul is driven to and fro. We are blown around by whatever the circumstances are. One day we are thrilled because our bank account looks good. The next day we are crushed because we got a bad review at work. We are double-minded.
But the anchor fixes us in one spot.
It gives the soul a single fixed aim. We are living for the glory of God. When you have one master, you have peace. When you are trying to serve 10 different masters, you have constant anxiety.
That covers true peace. But Edwards goes a step further, and this is where it gets really rich. He focuses heavily on that personal pronoun Jesus used, my peace. What is the theological weight of that specific phrasing?
This is perhaps the most beautiful section of the entire sermon. Edwards argues that Jesus is giving us the very same peace that he himself currently enjoys.
That seems like an incredibly high bar. Jesus is God.
He is. But remember, his earthly life. Think about the peace Jesus had while he walked the roads of Galilee. He was called a man of sorrows. He was constantly hunted by the religious leaders. He was accused of being demon-possessed. He had nowhere to sleep. And yet, was he ever frantic?
Never. He always seemed completely centered, completely calm.
He was, because he had perfect peace in his relationship with the Father. He knew he was the beloved Son. He was never disconnected from the Father's love. Edwards points out that he gives us that exact same peace, the peace of sonship.
Edwards also talks about the exalted state here.
Yes, Jesus is now in heaven. He has completely finished his work. He has entered into his rest. Edwards says we participate in that same justification. We are not down here frantically working for God's approval. We are resting in the finished work, just as Christ is resting right now.
He uses an Old Testament analogy here that really paints a vivid picture, the oil on Aaron's head.
This pulled straight from Psalm 133. Behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious ointment upon the head.
Walk us through the visual on that one.
In the Old Testament system, when the high priest Aaron was ordained for ministry, they would pour this specially formulated, highly fragrant oil on his head. And they did not skimp on it. They used a lot. It would run down his hair, down his beard, and drip all the way down onto the collar and the skirts of his robes.
It sounds incredibly messy.
It was very messy. But the symbolism is profound. Aaron represents Christ, who is the head of the church. The robes represent the body of believers, that is us. And the oil represents the Holy Spirit.
So the oil doesn't just spontaneously appear on the robes.
No, it is poured out on the head first.
Yeah.
But it flows down. Edwards is making the case that the peace, the Holy Spirit that rests in full measure on Jesus, flows down to the very lowest, most obscure member of his body. We don't get a different spirit. We get the overflow of his spirit.
It connects right back to that idea of the heir enjoying the estate with the testator. We are enjoying the spirit with Christ.
It is an organic union. We are branches in the vine. The sap that is running through the vine is the exact same sap that is keeping the branch alive.
So we have this incredible, substantial Trinitarian peace. Now, in part 3 of the sermon, Edwards makes a sharp pivot. He turns his gaze away from the upper room and looks out at the world around him. And he draws a contrast that is quite stark.
The great contrast. This is typical Edwards methodology. He believes you see the light much better when you put it right next to the darkness.
He asks the congregation a simple question. What does the world give? And he lists the things we all naturally crave. Large tracts of ground, stately mansions, vast treasures, crowns and scepters.
The things people betray each other for, the things entire nations go to war over.
But then he makes an observation that stops you cold, he says. Look at who actually possesses these things. God often gives these things to his worst enemies.
It is a really jarring thought for most people. We are heavily conditioned to think that wealth and success are a clear sign of God's favor. Edward says, not necessarily. Look at human history. The most wicked, ruthless tyrants often have the most gold.
He says God throws these things out like bones to dogs.
It is a harsh image, but it is incredibly effective. Imagine a wealthy man inside his house feasting at a massive table with his children. Outside, in the yard, there are dogs. He throws a bone out the window to the dogs. The dogs are happy. They're gnawing on the bone. But are they part of the family?
No, they are entirely outside.
Edwards is telling his people, do not envy the wicked, their wealth, or their earthly peace. It is just a bone. It is not the bread meant for the children.
And Christ's peace is the bread.
Yes, it is the real sustenance meant for the family.
Edwards then breaks down this contrast into 4 specific points. I want to walk through these very carefully because I think this is the absolute core argument of the synod. The first point of difference he highlights is reasonable versus delusional.
This is, in my opinion, the most brilliant insight Edwards offers in the whole text. He argues that Christ's peace is founded on light. It loves the light. The more you know about the holiness of God, the more you know about the demands of the law, the reality of the judgment, the truth of eternity, the stronger your peace actually gets. Reason is a friend to Christian peace.
But worldly peace.
Worldly peace is founded entirely on blindness. It requires ignorance to survive.
That is a bold claim. He is saying the only way a worldly person can be at peace is if they actively stop thinking.
Think about the logic of it. If a person whose only hope is in their bank account actually stops to think, really think about their own mortality, about the fact that they will inevitably leave every single penny behind, about the coming judgment of God, what happens to their peace in that moment?
It completely evaporates.
Instantly. So the only way to maintain that false peace is to not think about those things.
Yeah.
You have to actively suppress the truth. You have to keep the blinds pulled down.
Edwards uses some very vivid metaphors here to drive this home. He talks about a stupefying poison.
He compares worldly peace to a man who has taken a heavy drug that makes him physically numb. But the most haunting image he uses is the drunkard in the burning house.
Walk us through that one.
Imagine a house is fully engulfed in flames. The structural beams are burning through. The roof is minutes away from collapsing. But inside, right in the middle of the living room, there is a man sitting in an armchair. He is relaxed. He might even be singing a song. Why is he so calm? Is he actually safe?
No, he is in imminent mortal danger.
He is calm because he's dead drunk. He has consumed enough alcohol to make him completely insensible to his reality. Edwards says that is the exact nature of the peace of the world. It is the ease of a man who simply does not realize his house is burning down.
He also mentions the man in Bedlam, the insane asylum, who thinks he is a king.
Yes, the man is perfectly happy. He is strutting around his locked cell giving orders, but his happiness is based on a total delusion. If you woke him up to his actual reality, he would be miserable.
So Edwards is directly challenging the listener. Is your peace real, or are you just distracted by the poison?
Yeah, it is the question. He says, do but let light in upon their consciences, and it will at once destroy all their quietness. If the truth destroys your peace, you are holding on to a false peace.
But Christian peace is reasonable.
That stares physical death right in the face and says, I am safe. It looks at the perfect law of God and says, I am justified. It does not need to hide from the facts. It actually thrives on the facts.
That leads right into the second difference he outlines, virtuous versus vicious.
If worldly peace is based on stupidity and blindness, Edwards calls it a vile thing. It lowers our humanity. It makes us brutish because it forces us to shut down our higher cognitive faculties just to stay happy.
Whereas Christian peace elevates the soul.
It consists of a holy resignation and an active trust in God. It is an intelligent exercise of the soul, not a passive numbness. It makes you more human, more like God, to possess this kind of peace.
The third difference is sweetness.
He leans on Isaiah 55, verse 2 here. Wherefore do you spend money for that which is not bread? The world offers what he calls husks. It is pig food. It might fill the belly for a brief moment, but it provides absolutely no spiritual nutrition.
It just doesn't satisfy.
We all know this from experience. The thrill of the brand new car lasts maybe a month. The thrill of the big promotion lasts a week, and then the hunger comes right back. But Christian peace is exquisitely sweet because it rests on an immovable rock. It connects us to the infinite fountain of good, which is God himself.
And finally, we hit the fourth difference. This is the clincher: duration.
The eternal perspective. Edwards looks at the absolute best the world has to offer. The crowns, the massive mansions, the global empires. And he calls them bubbles on the face of the water.
That is such a fragile image. A bubble exists for a second, it floats along, and then pop.
And it leaves zero trace behind. You can have the pizza of the world for 40, maybe 50 years if you are incredibly lucky, but usually it ends before you die as things start going wrong, but it certainly ends the second you die.
But the legacy of Christ.
It is unfailing. It remains when the physical body gives out. In fact, it actually gets better when the body dies. It remains, as Edwards puts it, when the heavens are rolled up like a scroll.
Because it is built on the eternal God, it lasts as long as God lasts.
That is the ironclad promise.
This brings us to part 4 of the sermon, the application. Edwards turns his attention directly to the congregation sitting in front of him. And being a faithful pastor, he has a very sobering word of warning.
He addresses the Christless.
Yeah.
He knows there are people in the room, and perhaps listening to us right now, who are actively seeking their satisfaction in the world, in profit, in human glory, in the vanities of youth.
He does not pull any punches about the reality of their situation.
No, he doesn't. He tells them that even when they are cheerful, even when they are thoroughly enjoying their wealth, they hang over an infernal pit.
He uses the phrase, the sword of divine vengeance.
He says it hangs right over their heads. He is actively trying to wake up the drunkard in the burning house. He is shouting, "Wake up, the fire is real." He quotes Isaiah 57, "There is no peace, saith my God, to the wicked."
He argues that it is logically impossible to have true peace while you are actively at war with the creator of the universe.
You can have a temporary truce. You can have a very effective distraction. But you cannot have peace.
But he does not end the sermon on the warning. He pivots to a genuinely beautiful invitation. He invites them to what he calls the better portion.
And notice the specific appeal he makes. He offers a peace that allows you to have your eyes wide open.
That calls right back to the earlier point about reason. You do not have to be blind to be happy anymore.
That is the main selling point. You can face reality, all of it, the good, the bad, and the very ugly parts of your own heart, and still be at total peace. He promises that sins can be blotted out like a thick cloud.
He talks about the absolute security of this portion. He says God's promise and his oath are firmer than mountains of brass.
I love that specific imagery, mountains of brass. Completely indestructible, immutable. If God says you are his, the entire physical universe will dissolve into nothing before that promise fails you.
And he even reframes the things we naturally fear the most. He says that if you possess this peace, death and judgment actually become sweet objects of contemplation.
Imagine that mindset, thinking about Judgment Day and finding the thought sweet. That is only possible if you are holding the legacy of Christ, his perfect righteousness. Because then, Judgment Day is not the day of your condemnation. It is the day of your public vindication. It is the day you receive the full estate.
Edwards ends with a final earnest call. Turn your feet into the way of peace.
He describes a beautiful progression. It starts as a dawning light in this world. It might be faint at first. You might just have a little bit of peace amidst a lot of struggle. But it shines more and more until you reach the perfect day in the regions of everlasting joy.
It is a clear path from the initial grant of peace here on earth to the full inheritance in glory.
A path that begins with the legal death of the testator and ends with us living in his house forever.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's synthesize what we have covered today.
We have seen that the peace Christ gives is a legal transaction, a last will secured by his physical death and guaranteed by his resurrection life.
We have seen that it is totally distinct from the world because it is real, it is rational, and it is eternal. It is not the fragile piece of ignorance, it is the solid piece of truth.
And we have seen that we are co-heirs. We are not just holding a fond memory of Jesus, we are actively sharing the very life and spirit of Jesus.
It is a highly challenging and yet incredibly comforting word.
It forces every single one of us to ask where our peace is actually coming from. Are we just numbing ourselves?
Yeah.
Or are we building our house on the rock?
That brings me to a final thought I would love for you, our listeners, to mull over as you go about your week. We talked heavily about the drunkard in the burning house.
A very haunting image.
If your personal peace depends on you avoiding a certain subject, whether that is your own mortality or a failure in your past or your fear of the future, is it really peace? Or is it just a pause button on your anxiety?
That is the million-dollar question. True peace can look at anything. It can look at the grave, it can look at the demands of the law, it can look at our own massive failures and still stand firm. because it is not based on our performance or our ignorance. It is based entirely on the finished work of Christ.
If you have to close your eyes to keep your peace, it is not the peace of Christ.
Amen to that.
Thank you for joining us on Reformed Thinking. We hope this deep dive into Jonathan Edwards has been a real blessing to you.
Until next time.
Grace and peace.